What up, Wizards? It's Deb. SPMTG, we like it in Magic, and today, you know what? We've kind of got a lot to talk about for a weekend spoiler video. You know, usually we only get a few cards on the weekend, kind of a slow trickle. None of them are too impressive except for maybe one or two. And honestly, as far as Standard is concerned, that hasn't much changed this weekend. We got a few things for Standard, but not much. Draft fodder, new learn cards, a lesson here and there. But this is not really what the hype is all about. Although we will talk about those cards. I think there's a couple of cards that are worth talking about, and there's at least one card for Standard over the weekend that I'm marginally excited for. But again, that's not really what the story is here. No, the headlines this weekend have been dominated by Mystical Archives, and for good reason too. I've already spent 5 minutes or so gushing at the end of our first spoiler video about how much I love Mystical Archives, so I'm not going to spend too much time doing that here. Just go watch the last one if you want my take. But all I will say is that Wizards has gone well beyond what my expectations were, even, you know, as recently as the end of our last video where I spent so much time talking about how much I love this concept. Wizards, again, has just gone well beyond that and done so many things I never expected them to do. There is a banned list for these cards in Historic. There's 7 different cards from Mystical Archives going to be banned in Historic. We'll talk about that. But the stuff that we are getting for Historic is just... I would have never thought in a million years we'd get some of these cards in a format like Historic. Like, I'm very excited to play Historic for once. I haven't really been that excited about it this whole time, but knowing we'll be getting some of the cards we'll talk about today, I'm going to start brewing for Historic like tomorrow. But before we full on board the hype train, let's take a step back for a second and take a look at these Standard cards I was talking about. I think it's worth examining these, having a discussion, because we got to see a bunch of commons over the weekend. That means that they will be prevalent and possibly impactful in the limited environment. They may do a lot of work there. And nearly all of these have the learn ability, which might be way better than we think. You know, we might get some good rares or mythics that are lessons. And in that case, every learn card gets way better than we think. So I think it is worth taking a look at these. And some of them are actually pretty good, especially in the context of limited. So let's take a look at Study Break real quick, as well as Guiding Voice and Enthusiastic Study. As far as Study Break goes, first thing I want to say is that it's only been a couple of days of spoiler season. I'm already getting a little bit tired of these school puns. Maybe dial that back a little bit. But Study Break itself doesn't look half bad. It's 2 mana, 1 and a white for an instant. Tap up to 2 target creatures, and then learn. So effectively draw a card out of your sideboard, which is pretty good in limited, and maybe even best of one. Maybe an aggressive deck runs something like this. I like that it's instant speed, so you can tap down your opponent's creatures in the combat step, effectively shut them down for not only their combat step, but yours as well, so you can get in. So I like these tappers like more than a lot of people do, but they're mostly only meant for limited. That said, this one draws a card from your sideboard, so again, it might be better than we think it is, and I do like that it's instant speed, but I don't see it showing up in Standard anytime soon. As far as Guiding Voice, this one is 1 mana, but it's a sorcery, and I think that hurts a lot. You put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, and then you learn. So does the mono-white aggro deck want this? The mono-white life gain deck? I think a more important question is, does like the green-white counters deck want this? Probably not, unless we get a lesson that's specifically conducive to more counters or whatever. But again, I just don't think it's going to be worth a slot in a lot of decks. And if it were a combat trick, I might like it in limited, but it's not. So you really have to have, in some ways, especially in draft, where you have a little bit more control over this, I think you have to have a deck that's built around lessons in a lot of ways to make a card like this work, because it's really, really low impact otherwise. But I will say, it's going to be really interesting to try to draft up a deck that's a bunch of learn cards in the main deck and a bunch of lessons in the quote-unquote sideboard, which is effectively just every card you drafted but didn't use. So that's going to be a fun, way of looking at limited, but I don't love this card, obviously. Again, if it were a combat trick, it'd be better, but Enthusiastic Study is a combat trick, so I do like it better, but I don't like that it's 3 mana. It's 2 and a red for an instant. Target creature gets +3/+1 and gains trample until end of turn, and then you learn. So I like that rhymes. So it's got that going for it. There are some things I like about this, some things I don't. Obviously, the casting cost is way too high for a combat trick. You almost never want to be holding up 3 mana, but this is, you know, a combat trick that also rummages, which is just reverse looting. Discard the card first, then draw it. I saw people confused about that last video, so just clearing up the glossary. Rummaging is when you discard first and then draw. That's what this is. But I just like the idea of being able to draw a card out of your sideboard, especially at instant speed. That seems like it could lead to a blowout, especially if you do it on your opponent's turn. That's the thing about these instant speed learn cards that I really like compared with their sorcery speed counterparts, and a lot of these learn cards are sorcery speed. The thing about an instant speed one, really, let me start with sorcery speed. The problem with the sorcery speed learn card is that you play it, you probably don't have enough mana to cast whatever you wished for when you learned, whatever lesson you went and got. However, if you do it at instant speed on your opponent's turn, maybe during their end step or combat step, it won't be long before you get to untap and you have fresh mana to use whatever you went and wished for. And I think that's a much, much better situation than these sorcery speed ones. So even though holding up 3 mana is not ideal, especially just for a toughness boost of +1, it's possible that you trade a small creature and go get a lesson out of your sideboard, and that could be a good play depending on the board state. So I don't hate this card, but I probably wouldn't play more than one copy of it, and only then in very, very aggressive limited decks. I don't know why I talked about that card so much. Don't bother me. Here's Field Trip and Rise of Extus right here. Field Trip is, again, the school puns. It's got to stop. 3 mana, 2 and a green for a sorcery. Is this what I've been doing to people? Puns on this level of badness. But anyway, you search your library for a basic forest, put the card on the battlefield tapped, then you shuffle, and then you learn. This is fine. I guess it's not better than Cultivate. It's in no way better than Cultivate, but, when Cultivate and Beanstalk Giant rotate out of the format, maybe, but I wish it was just a forest card. I think it'd be better if it was just a forest, because then you can go get a Triome, a Snow Duel, but this is just get a basic forest, just a basic old forest, but then, again, effectively draw a card. That could be fantastic. That could be really good. I could see this actually being a key piece in some sort of rampy control deck. And the best deck in the format is kind of a ramp control deck right now. So it's not like this don't exist. So I could actually see this seeing some play again, especially post rotation. Or, you have to say this about all these learn cards. If we get a particularly good lesson, could be a fantastic card in very specific decks. But moving on to Rise, this is 6 mana, 4 and then 2 Orzhov hybrids. We should always have hybrid cards in every set. I love hybrid casting costs, but this is a sorcery. You exile target creature, exile up to 1 target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard, and then you learn. So that's not bad, but it is 6 mana at sorcery speed, so I'm not saying it ever touches standard, but it is kind of cool that it's +1 card advantage in a lot of situations. You might just rummage, in which case it's card parity, right? But you're trading a bad card for a good card some of the time. You're trading a card you think is bad for an even worse card some of the time too. So rummaging isn't always great or anything, but it is kind of nice to be able to exile a creature and something out of the graveyard. Exile a Croxa and then get it out of the graveyard or whatever. Seems like that's pretty cool. But then you just learn for something out of your sideboard, and that's effective card advantage. But of course, 6 mana. It's really steep. 6 mana is way too much, but I assume you just play this in limited regardless. At least 1 copy if you get it, because even though it's 6 mana, it's still removal, and that's very much playable, especially when it comes with card advantage stapled on. Really, any removal with card advantage stapled on, I'm a big fan of. It just depends on how you price it, and this is definitely priced out of me liking it, but I'll play it in limited. But anyway, let's move on to Environmental Sciences. This is the only lesson that we got to see today. It's 2 mana for a lesson. Search your library for a basic land. Put it into your hand. Well, you got to reveal it first. You can't just go get whatever you want and say, I got a basic land opponent. I don't have to prove it. But reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. You gain 2 life. So go get a basic land, gain 2. That's actually not as bad as you think it is. This is draw a card, gain 2 life for 2 mana. And that's okay. Kind of, Think of Birth of Melodus, for instance. Birth of Melodus does put a body on the battlefield, and that's kind of one of the better parts about the card, so I'm not really comparing this. I'm not saying it's as good as Birth, but any deck can play it. It goes and get a basic land of any type, and it gains you the 2 life right away instead of you having to wait a couple of turns. So I think there's a reason to compare the 2 cards, and Birth of Melodus has seen some sparing play here and there, and maybe after it rotates, this will see some play too. But maybe, again, if we see the correct learn deck, this might be a one-of in the wish board that people end up playing, especially considering it's a card that just gains you life for a relatively low amount of mana. So that seems like the kind of thing wish boards could really utilize. But we'll move on to the only standard card that I really kind of want to play with out of all these, and that's Star Pupil. This is just 1 white mana for a 0/0 human wizard, a very important creature type for party decks. By the way, white only had a couple of wizards in it. I know I haven't read the text box yet, but I want to point this out as why one of the reasons I'm excited about this. White only had a couple of wizards, and they're not very playable. You know, Draneth's Magistrate is playable, but usually just out of the sideboard. So there's not a whole lot of wizards that are super playable in game one in white. For party decks, this is a one-drop wizard for party decks in white, which is just a good thing to have. I wanted to point that out. But anyway, it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter, and when it dies, you put its counters on target creature you control. So this reminds me of a Venerable Knight with one less power that can put its counters on anything. You know, it actually reminds me of a lot of things. It reminds me of like a Doom Traveler type creature or something. But instead of leaving its power behind in the form of a token, it just puts its power on whatever's already in play. And it's not always just going to be one token or one counter. You know, with Luminarch Aspirin putting counters on it, it could end up putting a bunch of counters on a creature when it dies. Conclave Mentor, if you've already got one of those out, it gets 2 counters, you know. So we just saw a new thing that taps to put counters on whatever creatures have come into play that turn. So, you know, put counters on it that way. There's a bunch of different ways to put counters on this creature, and then suddenly when it dies, it's kind of its own little ozolith, you know? When it dies, you put all of its counters on something else. It requires you to have another creature in play, which isn't great, especially in the face of sweepers and whatnot. But I guess, hey, if you have a seasoned Hallowed Blade out, Hallowed Blade will survive the sweeper and get this thing's counters. And that makes it kind of a sweat for your opponent to cast the sweeper in the first place. So that might actually be a line that I hadn't thought about until just now that's actually somewhat important. So, I don't know. There's just a lot that I like about this card. I love cards that effectively replace their power on the battlefield when they die, especially in aggro. And I'm going to like this after rotation if we don't see better 1-drops. After rotation, we lose Speaker of the Heavens and All Seed of Life's Bounty and Selfless Savior and a bunch of 1-drops that deck likes. We get to keep Usher of the Fallen, but aside from that, we're not really looking great in terms of white 1-drops. We lose Giant Killer 2, just all the good stuff. So this might actually be a pretty playable white 1-drop once rotation happens. All right, let's go ahead and get to this Mystical Archive stuff. So we can talk about Historic for just a second, and just, even if you don't care about Historic, just think about opening some of these cards in a pack with this art. And this seems like a fun time to me anyway. But before we get to that, let's look at the 7 cards that are officially banned in Historic from Mystical Archives. Channel, Counterspell, Dark Ritual, Demonic Tutor, Lightning Bolt, Natural Order, Swords to Plowshares, according to Lee Sharp, a member of WotC's staff. Now, there's some stuff in here that I'm happy is banned, like Counterspell. Honestly, I don't know that I want that. Demonic Tutor is probably a little bit too powerful, even though I would love it. Right. Swords to Plowshares probably a little bit too powerful too. Although I think the format could handle a card like Lightning Bolt. Natural Order is probably a little bit too cheesy, to be honest. But Dark Ritual, yeah, I love it. It's one of my favorite Magic cards of all time, but we can't have that. So, you know, I understand the reasoning behind not putting some of these in Historic. But again, to be fair, the stuff they are giving us is just unbelievable. So let's take a look at all the Mystical Archive stuff that we got over the weekend, remembering that if a card is already legal in Standard, you can play it in Standard. Otherwise, you can't. But everything else that you see, except for the cards I just pointed out, are going to be legal in Historic, and that has some massive implications. So let's look at Thrill of Possibility, Primal Command, Infuriate. This is the only version of Infuriate I'll ever play. Same thing with Thrill, by the way. Crux of Fate, Memory Lapse, and probably the one everyone's been talking about. Although, let me just say, I love Memory Lapse. Memory Lapse is great, and I can't wait to have this card in Historic, honestly. I think it's in some ways more annoying than Counterspell, to be honest. And it's more playable in you know, multicolored decks and stuff. Memory Lapse, don't let it fool you. If you've never seen this card before, it might not look very good. It's stupid. It's very annoying to play against. But anyway, the card on the bottom right of your screen that you can't read, unless you speak the language, I'm not assuming anything about you, but the card that you may be confused as to what it is, costs just one blue mana down there. That's Brainstorm. That's Brainstorm, and it's legal in Historic. It's not so. That's atrocious. Like, people have already been talking about the implications of this. They go well beyond Stormwing Entity, although I do think that's a cool implication, you know. But the 2 worst cards from your hand on top of your library, scry them away with Stormwing Entity. That whole play only costs a few mana. So it seems like Stormwing Entity just got a lot better in Historic, but there are a lot of implications way past that, which is for control decks and combo decks that need to find their pieces. Brainstorm is a literal, like, legendary card. I mean, it doesn't have the legendary subtype or anything, but in the terms of like what this card has done throughout Magic history, it is literally legendary. There are not many cards that stack up to Brainstorm in terms of overall power level, and now it's in historic. But I guess let's keep moving up the pile. I mean, what can you say about Brainstorm being historic aside from like what have you done? Like, who's, you know, in a way. I mean, I'm excited to play Brainstorm in Historic. I am extremely, unashamedly excited to play Brainstorm in Historic, but there's still part of me that's like, you lunatics, what have you done? But I feel the same way about Stone Rain. Literally the same way. Stone Rain is legal in Historic, everybody. Along with Despark, Adventurous Impulse, Negate, a lot of these were already legal in Historic. Claim the Firstborn is the foreign card in the very middle of the screen, and oh my god, it's so beautiful. The card next to that is Mana Tide. It's Mana Tide. The card in the middle right of the screen is freaking Mana Tide. We also got Approach the Second Sun, Revitalize, and Electrolyze. One of my favorite Magic cards of all time for personal reasons. Electrolyze probably isn't anywhere near as good as it used to be, but there was a point where Electrolyze was absolutely incredible. Actually, Electrolyze might be okay still. In Historic, Electrolyze might be dope. But obviously the two best cards for Historic on this page are Stone Rain and Mana Tide, I think. Mana Tide, y'all. There's a white Force Spike, a white counterspell. In Historic. In Historic, Mana Tide. Never thought I'd see the day. But here we are. I imagine Mana Tide is going to be a reasonably important card. But Stone Rain, y'all, I have been yelling that they're cowards and they won't reprint Stone Rain in Standard for like, I don't know, the whole time I've had a YouTube channel. And they won't. They're scared. They scared. But they will print it into Historic apparently. And I am super happy. I am going to have my day ruined and ruin a lot of days with Stone Rain in Historic. It's actually low key. Actually, in terms of how I'm taking it right now, you can tell I'm excited. I'm kind of high key. High key, super like this might be my most anticipated card from Mystical Archives to actually play in a game of Magic on MTG Arena. I cannot wait to Stone Rain some fools. But anyway, all the other cards, I just want to point out the art for the most part. Approach is it's just very, very good looking. And then Negate. We have gotten some really good looking Negates. Right? The one from Ixalan looks good. The one from I think it's the latest core set, but I might be wrong. No, it's from Kaldheim, isn't it? That's beautiful art too, but I just don't see a reason to play with any Negate until the end of time besides this Negate. It's absolutely gorgeous. Ditto Adventurous Impulse. Adventurous Impulse already had like beautiful art the first time it was printed, but this looks like the guy from Wanderlust, by the way. The old school card Wanderlust. I'm fairly certain that might be the same guy, but I don't know. Maybe not. That's just my take on it. I wanted to say that. This is the guy from Wanderlust, and I really love this art on Impulse. Even if it's not played as much as it probably should be. I think when Wizards printed Adventurous Impulse the first time, they were like, oh, they're going to love this. And it only showed up in like 2 decks ever. You know, but I think it's actually like way, way better than we think it is. There's a couple more pages of these to look at, and some of them are still like unbelievably hype. Let's take a look at Natural Order, which you cannot play in Historic. It's too good, apparently. Increasing Vengeance is this next card. Lightning Helix, we'll get back to that. Compulsive Research. Faithless Looting. Faithless Looting. Brainstorm. Lightning Helix. Faithless Looting. Gift of Estates, which is pretty bonkers too. Gift of Estates probably has my favorite art of like any of these Mystical Archives. Just want to throw that out there. That is absolutely beautiful. As well as Tendrils, another card that you could freak out over if you wanted to. Doomblade and Chaos Warp. Now, Lightning Helix is another card, honestly, that I've been saying they won't print in Standard because they ain't about it like that. They're cowards. They're scared to print Lightning Helix in Standard, and they apparently are, but they will print it in Historic. Another card I can't wait to play. I get to play Stone Rain and Lightning Helix in the same deck on Arena. It's a good day. It's a good day to be a Magic player. Lightning Helix, y'all. Another one of my literal favorite cards of all time, and it's legal and Historic, dude. Compulsive Research, by the way, it's right in between some really good cards here, and I don't want to downplay how good Research is. But Faithless Looting, look, I don't want to talk about the art. I know that's all anybody can talk about on the card. I've already given my take on Twitter. Don't attack the artist. If you attack the artist, you're a jerk. But you can say you don't like the way the card looks if you want to. I think it's a valid opinion. But again, I'm not here to talk about the card, the art at least. I'm here to talk about the function of the card. And in terms of the function of the card, This is maybe, aside from Brainstorm, the dumbest thing that Wizards put into Historic. This is another card that, honestly, much like Brainstorm, is known for being unbelievably overpowered and undercosted. For what it does, this only costs 1 mana. You get to cast it twice, too. I mean, it costs 3 the next time you cast it. But usually, I mean, you can flash it back if you're looking for Gaslight Game. I mean, people flash back this card all the time. But just for the original rate, 1 mana, draw 2, discard 2 is... It was almost a mistake back when they first printed it. I mean, it just helps out so many decks. Decks that want to stock their graveyard for whatever reason, decks that count instants and sorceries in the graveyard, madness decks. Now we have escape in the format, flashback decks and stuff. If they printed this with flashback, they could print more cards with flashback. Reanimator decks. There's, God, so many decks. Look at the rate on Faithless Looting and look like it basically kind of says draw 4 cards. Or just draw 2 cards, at the very least. Because you can utilize your graveyard in such a way that you're not actually getting rid of the cards that you bend. Right? So it's just 1 mana, draw 2 cards. In a lot of ways. And then do it again later. You get to cast the card twice. For those not familiar with Faithless Looting, it is one of the actual most powerful cards in modern day Magic. When I say modern, I don't mean like modern legality, although it is one of the more powerful cards in terms of what's legal in that format. But in terms of the last 10 or 15 years of Magic, this is probably in the top 10 most powerful cards printed during that time period. So getting it into Historic is just... I didn't see it coming. I don't know about you, but I didn't. Aside from that, they gave us Gift of Estates, which I will say once more is good, and I love the art and need a print right now. But aside from that, Doomblade. I just want to throw that in there real quick. They gave us the meme. They gave us Doomblade. We always say this or that dies to Doomblade. They just decided to give us Doomblade so we could say that in Historic. Don't you just want your Historic to be modern? Actually, I kind of do. I kind of do. Chaos Warp isn't bad. It gives red decks a way of removing any permanent type, and that's important. Especially considering Historic. This card, from what I understand, sees a fair amount of play in red commander decks. But in Historic, even though it's 3 mana, it is instant speed. 3 mana seems like a lot, but it's instant speed. It gives other decks that don't have a chance at removing any permanent types a chance at doing that. Red decks can remove enchantments in Historic now, which is pretty ridiculous. But I saved Tendrils for last for a reason. This is probably the other card that people are freaking out the most about, or at least one of them. It's not the only one. But we got a couple of different Storm cards in this batch. We've already seen Mind's Desire. Now we see Tendrils, and we'll see another one next when I flip the page. But, I am super excited. In terms of all the Storm stuff we got, I think I'm actually more excited to play Tendrils than I am about Mind's Desire. And I was downright giddy to play Mind's Desire, so you can imagine how excited I am to play Tendrils in Historic. But anyway, let's move on to the last page of these, where we look at Eliminate. That's that first card. And by the way, I want to make a quick correction. I've already deleted this tweet because I didn't want it to be, I guess, misinformation, technically. Not disinformation. There is a difference. But I had said on Twitter that, this was the Japanese alternate art version of this card. And it's not. Somebody told me that it was the simplified Chinese version. And I believe that they are correct. So I did delete the tweet, but in any case, there will be Japanese art of this too, alternate Japanese art of this too, and this appears to be the art that we're getting in every other market, and it is gorgeous. This is the Eliminate I'll be playing with forever, unless the Japanese one looks significantly better. But I just wanted to point out that Eliminate is gorgeous. But Tainted Pact, also in this batch of cards. Tainted Pact is ridiculous. Tezzeret's Gambit, a Phyrexian mana card that's not incredible, but it's okay. Grape Shot, the other Storm card we got, and I had to say it super loud because holy crap, it's Grape Shot. Divine Gambit, which I see a lot of people making fun of. We'll get to that. Mizzix's Mastery, cool to have. This foreign card on the bottom left of your screen is Regrowth. Regrowth. It's been legal in Modern for a while now, and it hasn't really done anything, but I'm excited to play Regrowth in Historic. I mean, it's a card that was formerly restricted in Type 1. That's a powerful card. But anyway, God's Willing is also here, and Agonizing Remorse, which is absolutely beautiful. Just a beautiful looking Magic card, Agonizing Remorse is. But in any case, Grape Shot, another basically just legendary card in the history of Magic at this point. And if you're looking to build a Storm deck, it's very often going to be blue and red, so Grape Shot is often going to be sort of your, in-game combo piece of choice. I don't know how much Tendrils we'll be seeing in Historic is kind of what I'm getting at here. But I imagine Grape Shot will be the finisher, but I'm more excited for Tendrils. Divine Gambit, people are like, oh, did Wizards think that Divine Gambit was going to be like a super powerful card that everyone was excited to play with? So they made it a mystical archive, and now it's, people are just kind of ho-hum on it. I got a lot of takes. Again, I shared my takes on this on Twitter. I think a lot of things about this. I think that this might actually be really good. Remember that you can draft these cards. These cards are playable in the limited environment when you draft them or when you get them in your sealed pool. So this set is largely based around instants and sorceries. We got a Magecraft ability that wants you to play a bunch of instants and sorceries. So a card like Divine Gambit might actually be way better in a limited environment that revolves largely around instants and sorceries. So your opponent has a couple of cards left in your hand. You're not guaranteed, but you're far more likely to just make this a 1-for-1, and they don't get to drop anything because the other cards in their hand are instants or sorceries. So, just a thought. This could be much better in this draft environment than it is in constructed environments. But, it's only been a few months since Cowdhound came out. This card has a chance to do something in Standard, aside from what we've seen it do so far, which is literally nothing. So just keep that in mind. But in any case, that's my take on Divine Gambit. It might be really good in Limited. But aside from that, I just want to hit on Regrowth one more time. Regrowth. Restricted in Type 1, which is effectively Vintage, for those not in the know. But restricted in Type 1 Magic, a format that included Black Lotus and Moxes and Time Walk and Power 9 cards and stuff. This card was restricted right alongside all of those. So Regrowth has always been a card that I've clocked as super powerful the whole time I've been playing Magic. And it's probably one of the better, 1-for-1 restock effects literally ever printed. So I'm excited about Regrowth. Combo decks, really love them a Regrowth. A lot. Back in the day, you'd see a lot of decks that included, Demonic Tutor and Dark Ritual and Regrowth. And it sucks we only get to play one of those. One of those 1994 cards in Historic. But I'll take Regrowth all day. I'm excited about it. So yeah, Lightning Helix, Brainstorm, Storm cards, Faithless Looting, all of that in Historic, and a bunch more crazy Regrowth. I'm still excited about that. You can't keep me from being excited about Regrowth in Historic. I started playing in 95, and Regrowth means something to me. But anyway, that's all. That's all for this weekend. But was that enough for you? Right? I mean, Wizards has gone completely crazy. I think they may have actually. Somebody over there has lost their minds, and I love it. I'm here for it. So keep doing it, person. Whoever is making the decisions over there about stuff like this. I gotta say, whoever has slipped some CEO, some executive at Wizards, some sort of wacky pills, like keep putting them in the coffee. Because if they keep making decisions like this, then I'm on board. I'm actually on board. But anyway, again, I've already gushed about Mystical Archives for long enough. I think I'm done. But we'll be back for our regularly scheduled standard spoiler programming, I guess, on Monday, when we'll likely get a huge dump of cards. So make sure you like the video, sub to the channel, hit the bell for notifications so you know when I put that content out. Also, tomorrow, which is Sunday as I record this, you're probably watching this on Sunday. But Sunday night, I'll be hitting Twitch to talk a little bit more about these spoilers, get your take on them, talk about some decks I'm excited about building, and the cards I'm most excited about playing with from Strixhaven and Standard so far. So join us for the stream on Sunday night, probably, PM Eastern time, after the sun goes down and all that. We'll be on the stream talking about that, so join us if you possibly can. Twitch.tv/SPMTGDev or link in the description. But aside from that, you can support us on Patreon for $1 a month or more if you're into it, but $1 a month gives you access to voting on what decks we even do when the next Standard rolls around. And if you're excited about Strixhaven, and honestly, already kind of excited about Strixhaven, you want to vote on what decks we do first, and throughout the entire season for that matter, check the link in the description, go to Patreon. It would mean a lot to me. But, if you don't have the money to support, I just appreciate any way that you can, whether it's liking, subbing, doing any of that, or if you don't do any of that, I'm just glad that you're here. I need your views, y'all. But aside from that, I guess I'm done. It's your turn. Let me know how you felt about all this down there in the comments section. Hopefully the entire comment section doesn't become about Faithless Looting's art. I don't know why that's such a thing. I mean, I'm excited I want to see that card in paper. I want to know how that card looks in real life. But anyway, I don't want the whole comment section to be about that. If you're going to talk about Faithless Looting, talk about its impact on the historic environment. We all know how everyone feels about the art. But so let's talk about how we feel about these cards in a constructed environment where we've never had access to them before, and what are you excited to build? That's Magic the Gathering, baby. So let's talk about that. But anyway, until then, I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.